Here's a number that should bother every dealer watching this. The average dealership misses close to 1 in 5 inbound service calls. Not sales calls, service calls. The ones from customers who already bought from you, already trust you, and are actively trying to give you money. And when you add up the missed calls and the mishandled ones, the data says that somewhere between $850,000 to almost $2 million every year walks out the door of a single rooftop. Most dealers I talk to, they don't believe that number when they first hear it. Then they go pull their own call data and they get really quiet. My name's Sean Rains, and this is GoTo Connect Garage. Today, I'm sitting down with someone who spends his entire working life inside this problem. David Marcroft is the principal auto director at GoTo Connect. He's an automotive subject matter expert, and he's seen the call logs and the phone trees and the dead ends inside more dealerships than almost anyone I know. David, welcome.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
This is going to be a great conversation. I know a lot of dealers will get a lot of great insight from this. I want to start with this $850,000 to $1.17 million figure per rooftop. Walk me through what's actually inside that number. Like what's missed, a missed call versus one that's just mishandled, and why does mishandled cost almost as much?
Yeah, it's a headline number, right? It's your point, Sean. Like a lot of dealerships that I speak with, they see that number and they think there's no way, right? There's no way that this is real. But when you break down the cost of a phone call for a dealership, or rather, maybe a better way to put it is the value of a phone call for a dealership, it's somewhere between $250 and $400 in the service department. So taking that number into context, right? And now you combine that with 15, 20, sometimes 25% of phone calls in the service department that, to your point, are missed or mishandled. That number becomes a lot more believable. And you mentioned that, some dealerships, they sit down and they take a look at the data. A lot of the dealerships that I speak with, they actually don't even have the data, right? It's not accessible. Either it's not accessible or the leaders in the business don't know how to access it, right? It's locked up in kind of this ivory tower with IT. There's not that level of visibility that you would need. So let's break down a missed versus a mishandled phone call. A missed call is, of course, the call that comes into a department. It is, goes to voicemail. Customer hangs up while waiting to speak with somebody. That's the number that a lot of dealerships, if they do have the data, that's what they have visibility into. Mishandled by its very nature is a lot harder to track. That's a phone call that comes into the dealership. Customer talks to an employee, but they don't actually get ear to ear with the right person, right? And that's what we think of as a mishandled phone call. Is there some sort of a disconnect between either the receptionist or a customer calling in to sales, even though they need service? Because let's be honest, sometimes sales does a better job of answering than service does. Service sometimes is just overloaded with phone calls. So when you're dealing with mishandled phone calls and customers that expect instant gratification, right? It's just kind of the world that we live in. Becomes a really difficult challenge for these dealerships. And something that we've really spent a lot of time and effort focusing on here at GoTo.
When you sit with a dealer and you show them this data that you just mentioned, it's sometimes they don't even know how to access it. Maybe they don't even have the right things in place to be able to access it. But when you do have the opportunity to sit with a dealer and they're seeing that maybe for the first time, what's usually the reaction in the room?
Yeah, there's a wide array of different interactions. Typically it's kind of a moment of disbelief, right? So they typically, most dealerships pride themselves on the customer experience, and for good reason, right? That's such a important part of being a part of a car buying experience is, being that advisor that the customer trusts and that they know that they can rely on. And when you see the data, right, that some of your customers are not getting that ideal experience, that maybe some of your employees, for one reason or another, maybe are not treating customers like maybe an owner would, it can cause some really challenging feelings, right? And we're helping to kind of highlight those areas, right? Because you can only improve what you measure.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're able to take the phone system data and democratize it, make it accessible, that really allows the dealership to iterate, measure, and improve that customer experience, which again is just so critical today, right? Dealerships are dealing with a tremendous amount of change. Customers have higher expectations than they've ever had. Dealerships are competing with the ultimate convenience, which is basically one click to buy type of buying experiences. So how do you differentiate in that world? And the answer is through your customer relationship, through the experience that you give to your customer when they're interested in buying or selling a vehicle, and the way that you make them feel, right? And so many times that interaction starts on the phone.
I think it's really important, and I know that you illustrate that the customer experience has become paramount, and it's true. Everyone's been talking about it for several years now. I have told many, many dealers in the past, probably 5 years, that customer experience in service is arguably more important than it is in sales. If somebody loves a brand, you could probably fumble on a sales experience and they're going to come back because they love the brand. But when you mistreat them, mishandle them in some way in a service environment, it feels like a more real betrayal of trust, right? And so I love that you illustrate how important the customer experience is on the service side, because it probably doesn't get enough attention, which is why we're having a conversation like this. So 20% feels like a very, very, that feels impossibly high to someone who probably may think that their BDC is handling all of this perfectly. So where are these calls actually being lost? Is it a ring, no answer? Is it they're on hold and it gets abandoned? Is it voicemail? Is it the phone tree? Is it a combination of these things?
Yeah, I would say most commonly it's on hold, right? So if you think of yourself as a service advisor, especially during the busiest times of the day, they're juggling, 3, 4, 5 different things at one time, 2, 3, 4 different customers, right? They're getting inbound phone calls that are ringing to their desk phone. They're getting, messages from their supervisor about the number of open ROs that they have. They're getting, customers in front of them that have questions about the vehicle that they're dropping off. So they're kind of, in this catch-22 situation where they have to choose, right? And typically the lowest common denominator in that situation is the phone calls. It's just the reality of the situation. So we see in a lot of cases, right, that those on hold, the customers will typically be answered, but be left on hold. And a lot of times, depending on the reporting system that you're using, that's going to show as a handled interaction. You answered the call, they talked to a human. Well, we didn't actually solve the problem, right? And to your point, Sean, those service relationships, number one, are the most profitable in the dealership, right? I don't think it's any secret that fix ops is, where the dealership keeps the lights on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the highest expectation is, because these are customers that have a relationship with you. They have a history of working with your business. And if you disappoint them, there's a lot more on the line, right? From a recurring revenue perspective and from a customer relationship perspective.
For sure. It just eats right into that lifetime value of the customer that, by the way, it wasn't free to get them to even pay attention to your dealership and decide to come and start the relationship through typically a vehicle purchase with you. A little follow on this point. Is there a time of day or week pattern that dealers consistently kind of underestimate relative to this?
Yeah, I think that, and this data is highlighted really well, right? When you kind of have the full picture, which, is something that modern platforms can provide. But I think the one most commonly that kind of gets underestimated is Saturday afternoon. I think that a lot of dealerships spend a lot of time focusing on Saturday morning, and for good reason. That's typically a very busy time, right? That's when a lot of people have a break from their day job, and they can focus on maybe some tasks like getting their service appointment scheduled, or bringing the vehicle into the dealership. But I think Saturday afternoon, it typically is, after that rush, you still have a lot of inflow from a customer perspective during that Saturday afternoon time. And typically that one kind of sneaks up on dealerships. You're typically dealing with a shift change during that time as well. So that's one where, I typically, as we look at the call data, we'll see a spike, throughout the 7 days, is in that afternoon time frame.
Interesting. So watch those Saturday afternoons, dealers.
That's right.
Okay, so closing out a little bit on this segment, is there a single most common thing that dealers believe about their performance on the phone that the data just flatly contradicts?
Yeah, I would say, primarily it's the call handling rate, right? So basically, the answer rate and the call handling rate are not the same thing. And this kind of ties back to what we originally spoke about. But, answering 90% of your phone calls and solving the customer's need 90% of the time are two distinct things, right? So when you don't have that complete transparency into your customer interaction, things like AI summaries and alerting, in basically the bridge between your business and the outside world, those things can get lost in the mix, right? An answered call is not the same as a handled interaction. So I'd say that's, typically the data point that we focus the most on is, how can we highlight the difference between picking up the phone and appropriately serving that customer during their inbound call.
Mm. Well, let's talk even a little bit more about why service. Obviously, you mentioned it, and it's so true. It is the highest margin part of the business. That's where profitability truly matters. And so I'm curious to know from your perspective, why does this hit service harder than sales? Like, walk me through why a missed service call is more expensive than a lot of people assume.
Yeah, I think that there's a natural upsell opportunity in service, right? It's typically very transactional, so you're able to get a lot of service appointments booked. You're able to work with more customers from a service perspective than a sales perspective. You've also got less competition in that area, right? Because naturally, you need a body shop. You need service bays to work with these customers. Whereas with new car sales, you're dealing with potentially dealerships across the country that could ship a vehicle to a customer. So I think that from that perspective, it's more critical than ever, right? That dealerships have just an intense focus on the service experience. The new car sale gets a lot of the press. It gets a lot of the attention from a dealership perspective, and it is a very important part of the business. But the service, the ability to deliver on the service side and in the fix op side of the house is really what determines, right, the health of the dealership operations and the profitability overall, right? That's been our experience, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. The single most important factor for a dealership is what is the number of our inbound calls to the service department that's converting into service appointments and revenue for the business.
Mm-hmm. A dealership can miss a sales lead and maybe still recover. A missed service call is different. What actually happens when, that service call gets missed and the customer in, say, the next 10 minutes?
Yeah. Again, we're dealing with kind of the age of the goldfish today, right? So customers expect instant responses from businesses in the way that they want to interact, in the place that they feel comfortable interacting, and in the time frame that they expect, which is under a minute, quite frankly. So if you're not meeting your customer where they are in the way that they want and in the time frame that they expect, you're at high risk of losing that. And service appointments naturally, in many cases, in fact, most cases, there's a lot more urgency associated with them, right? There's some sort of a problem. A lot of times the new car buyer, it's kind of it's something that they're excited about and there's some urgency built into that, but it's a nice to have, not necessarily a need to have. What we see on the service side is that it's much more, right? You've got a customer that has a check engine light that's on. Now they've got this instant anxiety in the back of their mind, and they have to solve that. And they're going to go to the first person that's going to answer the phone to solve that anxiety for them. And so if you don't answer that phone call, they're already on Google, right? They're already looking up 5 or 6 of your competitors that could solve that anxiety in the back of their mind. So that's why that service appointment is just such a critical moment that you're ready, right? When that trigger hits, customer knows that they need something. The consequence is huge.
Massive. And it affects the next thing I want to address with you, which is service retention. I mean, it's easy to argue that service retention is like the entire game when it comes to fixed ops. And I'm curious to know from your side, how does phone handling kind of quietly erode the retention numbers that dealers are spending real money to protect?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a slow bleed, right? It's kind of death by 1,000 cuts in a lot of cases with the fixed op side. No single missed call is going to, absolutely kill your retention numbers. But when you see a trend over time, right? 15, 20%, 25% of your phone calls at specific times of day, week over week, month over month, that's going to make a meaningful impact on the revenue of the business over time, right? And it's no secret that dealerships are scrapping to retain customers as it is, right? And it's getting harder and harder. It's unfortunately not getting easier to sell new cars. So you've got less customers coming in the front door, and you've got more customers leaving out the back door because they can't get a hold of anyone. It really creates a really challenging problem for these dealerships. And a lot of times it's not even visible to them, right? It's something that is kind of quietly eroding, to your point, the revenue on the back end. So really having that visibility and knowing what you don't know is a quiet advantage as well over your competition.
Yeah, it is definitely something that can kind of be flying under the radar until the negative trend is established and it's really harming you. Do you think that buyers' tolerance for friction has actually changed, or do you think we've always been this bad and now we're just measuring it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I would say it's probably both, right? I think the tolerance for friction has genuinely declined, right? So if you look at kind of metrics over time, again, I think that COVID, a lot of things were highlighted during kind of that mass worldwide experiment, moving everything digital that we had in 2020. And that is that customers will pay for convenience, right? So if you think about DoorDash as an example, right? DoorDash made all their billions off of making a convenient experience for the customer. Customer can buy how they want on their terms. And I'm sure that a customer would probably pay extra if DoorDash kind of spoon-fed them their food, right? So just as an example, right? But I think that gives a kind of a good analog to that customer expectation, which is that customers really demand a lot from businesses today. And that's a trend that we've seen over time, and it's only increasing. So for those dealerships that are identifying this trend and looking to get ahead of it, right, it's really something that is, skating to where the puck is going. And that is consistent, immediate customer experiences in the way that your customers want to interact with your business.
That's a great example. There's a phrase Disconnected communication channels. It sounds, just think about it, sounds somewhat obvious. It gets used quite a bit. I think sometimes dealers need a little bit of interpret what you really mean by that. So in a real dealership, what is disconnected communication channels? What's that actually look like? Let's just say it Tuesday at 11 a.m. or maybe Saturday afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it refers to kind of, you know, dealerships that have had to go out and basically buy point solutions, right? And so let's unpack that a little bit. What is a point solution? It's a system that does one thing for you, right? And dealerships are used to this. They go out and, they have a customer that says, we really need to text enable our Google listed phone number because that's how our customers are interacting with us. Oh, we need to, go and buy a conversational AI because our customers demand convenience and, we're bleeding revenue by not giving our customers 24/7 access to our service appointment scheduler, right? So, and the list goes on and on and on, of course, right? But what are you doing when you do that? Number one, you're introducing vendor complexity. So each one of those contracts is, of course, going to produce its own invoice and its own contract end date. And so now you've got this big stack of invoices and contract management. But maybe the more important one is you never really have a full picture of the customer experience, right? You've now created multiple different ways that a customer can interact with the business. And so if you're really trying to understand what a customer is experiencing when they're trying to work with the dealership, you have to check 4 or 5 or 6 different places. And so you've got these data silos and this barrier to access, and it just becomes too challenging. You as a dealer principal just simply don't have the time to go and track down and really understand, which is a problem, right? If you're trying to run the business and really understand, put yourself in your customer's shoes, and it's impossible to do so, that becomes really difficult to solve the underlying fundamental problems in the business to really provide that second to none customer buying experience or service appointment scheduling experience.
Yeah. Staying in this line of thinking, I was wondering if you could walk me through just one customer that's trying to reach service. They call, they get a phone tree, they hang up, maybe they text some numbers, no reply, maybe they fill out a web form. What's happening on the dealership side in the steps like that?
Yeah. So again, it's kind of essentially you're creating a notification in each of the different systems, but there's no single pane of glass. There's no unified view. And so it's the underlying problem can be difficult to really grasp because, you've got maybe 2 missed service appointments here in this platform. You've got maybe 5 missed sales calls on this other service that you're using. Those may or may not be the same customer, but who knows, right? So it compounds the problem when you're kind of taking each of these individual interactions that have extremely high business value and spreading them across multiple different platforms. It really just becomes cryptic, right? No one really can get to the bottom of, okay, here's the problem. Our customers are complaining they can't get us on the phone. The important question there is why, right? And that's a difficult question to answer when you've got data spread kind of, yard sale across the business.
Yeah. It's like one call can be kicking off chaos internally in the dealership and oftentimes maybe even invisible to them, but they feel the frustration realizing they've got all this disconnection happening just from one person trying to interact with the store. Is there a place, like where's the handoff that breaks most often? Is it phone to text or web to phone? Is it BDC related?
Yeah, I would say typically it's from reception to sales or service, right? So I think a lot of times those phone calls don't make it through for a number of reasons. One of those is that a lot of times it doesn't actually show that this is a customer call, right? So you're not actually disclosing to the employee in the back that, okay, this is actually a really high value interaction. We've got a customer that's calling in that wants to speak with us. But we're not able to see that, right? And so there's some confusion there in terms of, is this a priority A or is this a priority B or C? It's difficult to really understand that with some of the older systems that a lot of these dealerships are accustomed to using. But I would say, it's also very common for us to see, abandoned calls while on hold, right? I think that anyone that's called their airline knows that when you're waiting on hold for a period of time, it can be really frustrating. And 90 seconds, 120 seconds feels like an eternity. And in some cases, that's commonplace in some of these dealership environments. And so when we're able to solve that underlying problem, which is how can we use technology to make it more convenient for our customers to work with us when we have time, as opposed to asking them to adjust to our way of working, the results speak for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little more about BDC. When a dealer is considering all of this, they're learning about it, and they say, David, we've got a BDC, we're covered. What's the gap that statement hides?
Yeah. So for the BDC, I mean, the BDC kind of is known as, kind of the place that all of the phone calls go to, right? It's BDC's responsibility to be that filter. So, if a customer calls in, we're going to establish, is this a high value interaction or is it, a frequently asked question? So, simply saying that you have a BDC doesn't necessarily address the underlying problem, which is how do we essentially make sure that every customer, regardless of their intent, is getting a good experience with us, right? So I think that you can really only answer that question honestly if you have the data to back it up, right? How many calls came in that were actually answered? How many of those again got you're with the right person on in a time frame that we expect, and how many of those customers actually were successful, right? In booking a test drive, booking a service appointment, and accomplishing what they needed. And so simply having a BDC, right, while it is a step in the right direction, it definitely shows that your dealership cares about the customers that are calling in. It doesn't provide that full picture that you really need to understand what it's like as a customer calling into your store.
Mm. So do you see this as primarily a technology problem, a process problem, an accountability problem? If I were a dealer, if I was just saying, hey, I think it's one of these things, would you push back on me if I called it one of those?
I honestly would. I would push back on really isolating one over any of the three, because typically it's a combination of the three, and they kind of tend to reinforce each other. But the technology problem is very real, right? You can't see the whole customer journey if your systems don't talk to each other. But if you buy the integrated technology and don't change the process around it, the technology just automates the old dysfunction. But the process problem is very real, right? So if no one's held accountable for the outcome of the process, it won't survive the first really busy Saturday at the dealership. And then the accountability problem, just kind of round things out, right, is if you can't hold somebody accountable, if they're using systems that you don't have visibility into, like personal cell phones and different tools that are not managed and owned by the business, you ultimately can't hold anyone accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
think that it's kind of typically a combination of the three, right? It's how can we provide amazing tools for our employees that make their job easier so that they can do their job better. There's less frustration in the dealership, and that translates to less frustration for our customer.
Yeah, better experience for the customer. That's the North Star.
That's
Okay,
right.
I want to pull you in a little bit on some things that are more buyer related. Put us in the customer's seat. They've got check engine light. and a work day, what does the experience of trying to reach a dealership actually feel like right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just such a perfect example, right? Because when you see that check engine light come on, whether it's during your commute or as you're pulling into the garage, you're immediately stressed, right? And there's, in a lot of cases, really nothing else that matters to you at that moment because, you know, cars represent independence in so many places in this country. And so it's really something that customers feel a intense desire to solve as soon as possible, right? And that's why this service experience is so important. But if you picture yourself as that customer, right? Uh, let's say the check engine came on during your commute. You don't know if it's something small or something serious. You've got a meeting coming up in 20 minutes, right? You try to call the dealership and talk to the receptionist who transfers the call to the service department. You like to have 15 minutes to prep for your meetings, and you're on hold for 2, 3, 4 minutes in some cases, right? So
Mhm.
now you've got yourself in this really tricky situation. You've got this stress that is in the back of your mind. You've got a really important meeting coming up. And this is just something that customers are dealing with on a very regular basis, right? So you have these competing priorities. You've got a very time sensitive issue. And when you don't have that visibility into the number of times that this is happening on the fixed op side of the house every day, um, you really find yourself in a position where, again, you're kind of silently bleeding customers over time.
Mm-hmm. Some people think that loyalty died years ago. I'm not one of those people that believe that. I think just most people don't earn it. Brands don't earn it. Personal brands don't earn it. Corporate brands don't earn it. But they very much do. And I could use myself as an example. I've been loyal to a particular automotive brand for many years, bought several of their same vehicle. So that's why I want to ask you, how much loyalty does a longtime customer actually have when the phone experience fails them a couple times?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, I tend to agree with you, Sean. Right? It's still there, but it's quickly deteriorating over time. That's what the data tells us anyway.
Mhm.
Um, Customers really want to be delighted, right? Not only do they want to have their task solved, but they want to be delighted when they work with the business. And so, typically, if you've got a strong relationship with the customer, they'll kind of give you a pass on the first time. But if it's a consistent trend where customers are calling in and they're not able to solve their problem quickly, efficiently, or on their terms, there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of businesses out there. Maybe they'll talk to a friend about their difficulty, and maybe they get a referral to one of your competitors. So it's loyalty matters, and there's a reason why these customer relationships get so much attention in the automotive space, and it's because you are able to retain those customer relationships in the majority of cases, but that doesn't address kind of the underlying problem, which is that dealerships have to have an intense focus on solving the customer's need the moment that they discover it.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned competition. So let me, and I think a lot of dealers know this, but I think it's worthy of restating over and over. A competitor who responds faster in service specifically, remind this audience, who is that competitor? It's not, it's not usually or not always another franchise dealer, is it?
Yeah, not always, right? You've got all kinds of different providers that are coming in to try to disrupt this space, right? You've got mobile only service providers that are completely, they don't have in some cases a dealership at all, right? You've got independent shops that, of course, are not affiliated with a specific franchise, and then you've got kind of discount stores as well, right? You've got kind of all different segments of the market that are trying to tackle a specific customer segment. But really what we've seen is, the more that you can utilize technology to understand what your customers are needing, and to be the first one to answer that call, whether that's a human being answering a call, or if it's the ability to answer your calls 24/7, 365 and monetize your sleep. Right? It's really those businesses that are forward thinking and putting themselves in the shoes of their clients that are seeing the most incredible outcomes.
Mm-hmm. It can be very surprising for dealers when they take very basic searches like Toyota oil change or Toyota Camry oil change to see who's actually showing up, not just organically, but people who are paying to be in results. You might be surprised that it's not all Toyota dealers. So last question in this segment is, what does a dealer who has fixed this sound like to a customer that a dealer who hasn't doesn't? Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, a dealer who's fixed this sounds like a business that's expecting you to call, right? So
I like
when
that.
when a customer calls in and someone answers, right, the person that you're on the phone with knows who you are. They know the vehicle that you bought from the dealership. They know the last time you had an oil change. They have the context to the conversation, like maybe your best friend, right? Maybe that's an exaggeration, but the idea is it's a warm welcome, right? It's not we'll get to you when we have time, right? I think that's kind of the difference between those two, is dealerships that are really prioritizing phone calls as a business critical piece to convert our online shopper and our fence sitters into converted leads and car buyers and lifetime service customers. They're the ones that are really taking the time to understand, what does it actually look like when a customer calls in? Not only how long does it take us to answer the phone, but what does that conversation actually sound like when we are working with that customer?
Yeah, I love the sounds like somebody who is expecting your call. Like, it's so, like, that seems like that should be plastered all over. That's such a great takeaway. I would want to tell every dealer that's how you need to approach everybody after you've sold them a car. Every time they call, you should be treating them like you're expecting to hear from them, and that you're delighted to hear from them, and continuing to give you the opportunity to take care of them. Okay, let's go into kind of final segment, which is more questions around what good looks like. So take the GoTo Connect logo off the table for just a second, What does a connected communication setup actually look like as a dealer experience, regardless of who's providing it?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And at the core, it's one view of your customer experience across every channel that they use to contact you. Right? So a customer that called you yesterday, texted you this morning, sent in a request on your website, talked to you on website chat, that should look like one unified view, right? You shouldn't have three different places where you're tracking what that customer did to work with the dealership. And then it's also a service line that routes intelligently, right? So if your advisors are busy, the call doesn't just sit on hold endlessly in limbo, right? There's a path to a callback. There's some sort of a messaging built in where customers have options. If they happen to call when 10 other customers did, they've got the ability to solve their task, and they know they're not asking themselves, will I get a call back? It's when will I get a call back? Right? You build that trust over time. And then it's also visibility into what's happening in real time, right? So how many calls are waiting? How long have they been waiting to speak with somebody? Which contacts have not been responded to? And a closed loop on follow-up, right? Nothing falls through the cracks. We know every time a customer leaves a voicemail. We know every time they called us and were unsuccessful. And we know that not 5 days later, but 5 minutes later, 5 seconds later, right? That's the difference between customers that come back for more and customers that are searching for alternatives.
Mm. Okay, so what's the first thing a dealer should measure on Monday morning if they want to know how bad their problem is? Is there a particular report, some number they should pull that they should be looking at? Like, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think that missed calls on the service line is the first place to start, right? So if you haven't taken a whole lot of time to dig into this yet, a great place to start is, for the service line, what's our percentage of calls that come in to the number of calls that actually talk to a service advisor, assuming that data is available. I think that number alone will tell you more about your communication problem than most like full phone system audits, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because number one, if you have access to that data, you can, just very simply multiply your average RO value to that number and really understand the magnitude of the problem. And if you don't have access to that data at all, if you don't have a tracking system in place for that, it could be a good opportunity for you to take a look at the ability to track that metric.
Mm. Yeah, I like that. Okay, picture in your mind a dealer principal is watching this conversation. They're going to wonder, okay, who in my store? They might think they know, but or they do know, but maybe the question here is like, is it the right person? So, dealer principal that watches this and they're thinking, okay, who in my store actually owns this problem? Is it the service manager? Is it a BDC manager or director? Is it the general manager? Who ultimately should be accountable for the phone? And in addition to that, like who is it usually by default?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that it's the general manager, right? So I think the general manager has a responsibility to all customers and all departments and to all employees to understand the operations of the business like the back of their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And the phone system is just such a critical piece of that puzzle. So I would say if I had to point one person out, right, the general manager is going to be the maybe the most important voice in the conversation, but certainly not the only voice. I think that every department has insights to share and specifics related to both the customer experience and the employee experience that's going to lend itself to a conversation around a modern customer engagement platform. But I think that, if I had to, put my finger on one person in the dealership that really should have a handle on this and understand the data and understand what your customers are telling you without saying anything, it should be the GM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. Let's get a little bit from you on what do you think like a realistic recapture is. If a dealer fixes this, maybe they're remembering that number that we threw out, that 850,000 to 1.17 million. What's genuinely, recoverable for a dealer versus just their, dreaming?
Yeah. Yeah. So, most of the dealerships that we're working with are realistically reducing their mishandle or missed calls by 50 to 60% across the board. So yeah, it's significant, right? And that I think lends itself to number one, the visibility into the data, and number two, opening up new channels for customers that they didn't have before, and giving them that convenience and that ability to work on their terms with your dealership and on their timeline. Just making that process as simple as possible. So, 50 to 60% improvement in, again, not only your answer rates, but the mishandle rates by leveraging technology that works inside of your ecosystem, that knows who your customers are and knows who your customers are working with, really completely changes the game when it comes to our digital retailing experience. The customer that is a fence sitter, they're not sure who they're going to work with. They want to call you on the phone before they step foot in the physical dealership. That's good. It's just going to be a game changer from an operational perspective.
Yeah, and you just kind of provided the map. So a dealer says, "Yeah, we have one of those 50 or 60% deficits, and we fix it. Let's just say we improve by 50%. Just take your average ROs written in the last, year. You could use a lot of different time frames, and now you come up with a fairly accurate, not very fuzzy math. That's pretty accurate math on what you could be recapturing. It seems like a no-brainer. But there are dealers when they go about fixing problems that they start to implement it and they don't do it the right way. So where do dealers go wrong when they start implementing a fix in this particular area? What's the failure mode, even when they may be buying the right tools?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of times what dealers struggle with is buying the tool, but not maybe spending enough time changing the behavior, right? So I think that tracking what's happening is step one, and that happens at the top. But there's a dissemination process where you need to take that knowledge and insight and get that to the managers and get that into the actual one-on-ones during the conversations. And so the easier it is for you to share this information out to the teams that are responsible and that should know, the more success you're going to have implementing new tools to make your dealership successful and move the ball down the field. But yeah, I mean, the tools enable the better behavior. They don't replace the need for it, right? The implementation fails typically when the dealership treats the technology as the solution. It certainly plays a significant role, right? And if you don't have the right tools for the job, that's a problem that needs to be solved. But ultimately, it also comes down to user adoption and the time that you're spending to train the team on how to be successful using the tool.
Yeah, I love that answer. There's so much in the technology revolution of the last probably 30 years in automotive where I've personally said to dealers when they're like, "This, I don't think this is working." I'm like, "I think you might not be asking the right questions. Are you working it?" Because these things they have all kinds of complexities and capabilities that require you to actively understand and how to utilize them. Otherwise, you think it's like a light switch. Well, I bought the right thing. I just turned it on. Now it's going to fix all my problems. And it just doesn't work that way in most cases. Okay, so I just have a couple more questions for you before we park this episode, David. You're a car guy. You're an automotive guy at GoTo Connect. You are the car guy. Like across all the rooftops you see, you talk to lots of dealers. Is there, and if so, what's the trend line over this in the next 2 or 3 years? And I guess also I would ask, is it better or worse?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's going to get harder before it gets better for the stores that kind of kick the can down the road, right?
Mm.
So customer communication expectations are being set by some of the most valuable companies in the world that have the best digital experiences and tens of millions of dollars to spend on applications, right? And this is not just automotive, right? This is across the board. But I think that automotive is kind of at this tipping point, kind of where bookstores were maybe 15, 20 years ago, right? Where there's this ultimate convenience factor that's coming in. And the car buying experience, granted, it's a lot more complex. There's a lot more that goes into it. It's a much higher ticket item. But I think that that's a really important analog to use to the current state of the automotive market, is that you're battling ultimate customer convenience, and the tool that dealers that we work with have chosen to use is battling that with ultimate customer experience, right? So for dealers that are choosing to invest in a tool that's going to allow them to deliver that, the trend is definitely better, right? We're seeing higher service retention numbers. We're seeing higher close rate on new car sales, right? When you're able to meet that customer in the moment that they need it. The new car sale process, of course, is accelerated over time, right? Most new car buyers are making a purchasing decision within 1 week. So if it takes us 2 days to call somebody back, we're playing the game on our heels. So for the dealers that are not, kind of standing still, they're kind of falling behind relative to their digital competition and relative to their competition down the street as well. Customer experience is very clearly kind of the most important thing when it comes to maintaining and growing your customer base over time.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk a little bit, not a lot about AI, but AI voice and automated text, all of that. Does that close this gap, or do you think it just is moving it somewhere new?
Yeah, I think that it closes a portion of the gap, specifically for after hours and for overflow. I think that having it as an option for our customers, but not a mandate, is the right approach, right? So dealerships that want to utilize AI, the AI needs to work with their staff, not against them, has been our experience, right? So if it's going to impact the customer experience negatively to wait for a human being to answer the call, that's where AI can play a really important role. But, for those customers that still want to talk to a human being, that want somebody with a warm answer that's going to address their question and maybe ask them, something fun about their vehicle that they love, that's not going away. That's not going away anytime soon. People love working with people, and that is your competitive advantage as a dealership.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If you had 90 seconds with a skeptical dealer principal or general manager who thinks this doesn't really apply to their store, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would just say, let's go take a look at your service department's phone metrics, or maybe just your service department now. Let's go talk to your service advisors or maybe the service department manager, and ask them how many times they heard the phone ring and they just simply weren't able to get to it, right? And you may or may not get an honest answer there, but I think asking the question is a good place to start, because every phone call that we're missing in that department, as we've discussed today, are customers walking out the back door. It's not immediately visible to dealership management that this is happening, but having that conversation and understanding where those gaps are for our customers is the right place to start, right? Don't hear it from me. I want to hear it from your employees. How many customers have come in and mentioned that, this is the third or fourth time that I've called, and how are you tracking that, right? So I think that, asking for the data, both by word of mouth and hopefully with the systems that you're using, is the best place to start, turning a dealer principal from a skeptic into somebody that thinks this is something we should take a deeper look at.
Yeah. And this kind of ties into that, but is there one thing that you wish every dealer understood about all of this that they consistently just don't?
Yeah, I would say, the phone system, I think, is kind of an afterthought in a lot of cases, right? It's kind of, some dealerships even think of it as kind of a necessary evil, right? Believe it or not, right? There are some dealerships out there that think of the phones as something that we have to provide, but it's not necessarily something that we should spend a lot of time on. But if you think about it from a dealership, right, there's 3 ways that a customer can interact with your business and be introduced to your business. That's on your website, that's walking in your front door, and that's calling you on the phone, right? Think about how much time and energy you spend on your showroom and on your digital presence online, understanding that online shopping experience. And how does that relate to the amount of time and effort you're spending on your phone call experience? So I think that's something that I really like to highlight, right? This is one of the 3 key pillars when it comes to your business's ability to attract and retain customers. And so it deserves, a lot of time and effort to understand what we're doing well, understand where there's areas for improvement.
Yeah, I love that answer. We have found the perfect place to park this episode of GoTo Connect Garage in the GoTo Connect Garage. Love it. Okay, audience, if you took one thing from this, let it be the homework, not the number. We talked about some big numbers. And yes, you should be actually looking at ways to improve and claw back and recapture some of this. But the homework, go pull your own missed call data this week if you can. The service line, the last 30 days, that will get you where you want to be looking for sure. Most dealers who do that kind of stop arguing about whether the problem is real and they start asking how fast they can fix it. David, I want to give you all the flowers. Thanks for tackling this one head on. There's a lot of great information in this that I know that dealers will find very valuable. To the audience, if this was useful, there's more coming up in the series from GoTo Connect Garage. We'll keep going deeper to help all of you dealers out there improve performance while providing exceptional customer experiences. So, again, as we park this episode, remember this: the phone is still ringing at your store. The only question is whether anyone's answering it. See you next time.
Go to where? GoTo Connect Garage. GoTo Connect Garage.